Finally, most of us have been stuck in traffic, and yes, we've dreamed of a flying car. Well, now Silicon Valley is racing to make those dreams come true.
At 6:15 p.m., a U.S. freeway is locked in standstill traffic that bends the city into stillness. Engines idle, brake lights forming a red river stretching beyond sight. Then above it, a Richter X4 rises quietly like a flying scooter, clearing the chaos. It isn't a lab concept anymore, priced at $39,900, no license required, shipping in 2026. And just like that, the idea of travel starts bending in real time. But what actually makes this machine different from the dozens of flying gadgets that keep showing up at tech fairs? Is it the tech, the law, or something much deeper about who gets to control the sky? The machine that wants to be a scooter. At a warehouse floor in Las Vegas during CES 2026, a crowd gathers around something that doesn't quite look like aviation. It sits low, folded, almost casual, like someone left a futuristic scooter next to a stack of flight cases. But then it powers up, and what was once a grounded pod starts hinting at lift, at movement, at something that shouldn't feel this ordinary. According to PR Newswire coverage of Richter's CES 2026 reveal is the X4 Air Mobility Pod. And here's the thing that makes it feel less like aviation and more like something you could actually order. The X4 is being sold at $39,900 with a $5,000 deposit model and expected deliveries in Q2 2026, according to Electrify News reporting on the device. They call it an ultralight eVTOL Air Mobility Pod, a label that sounds futuristic but is really about making it feel accessible, almost like an appliance. Instead of an aircraft, you'd spend years learning to operate. Now, what really gets interesting is how physical it actually is. 8 propellers arranged in a 4-axis configuration, each paired with 63-inch carbon fiber folding props that don't just generate lift, but collapse into something compact enough to fit into a pickup bed, as described in Electrify News coverage of the X4. But stepping back from the engineering side, what stands out is how ordinary it feels compared to the louder, flashier flying machines people usually associate with personal flight, like jet suits or experimental single-seat craft seen in viral videos but rarely used beyond controlled environments. And then you start seeing the performance layer come into focus, about 80 kilometers per hour top speed, roughly 50 miles per hour, and a flight time sitting near 20 minutes per charge, with Electrify News noting that extended battery packs are already being considered for later versions. Noise stays under 65 decibels, quiet compared to helicopters, but still present enough that you wouldn't miss it in a city. Payload is around 100 kilograms, built for a single adult, which makes it less of a transport revolution and more of a personal bubble lifted into the air. Control isn't just a joystick fantasy either. It mixes pre-planned route systems with low-altitude hovering that can drop it as close as 3 meters above ground, almost like it's skimming the surface instead of fully leaving it, according to PR Newswire specs. And compared to gravity jet suits or Jetson 1-style machines, the difference isn't just price or design, it's intent. Those feel like showcases. This feels like something that wants to live in a garage, charging quietly next to an electric bike. And when you really look at how something like this gets approved to exist in the first place, it stops being just about engineering and starts touching something far more uncomfortable. Because the X4 isn't only a machine you can buy, it is a shift in how aviation systems are forced to react when everyday people step into the sky for the first time. And that tension is where things get more interesting. So, if the X4 looks simple enough to ride like a scooter, then which law did Richter bend to make this possible? The hidden law that lets anyone fly. A machine like the X4 doesn't really become real the moment it's built. It becomes real the moment the law quietly decides it can exist in public airspace. And that's where things start to feel strange, because buried inside US aviation rules is something called FAA Part 103, a category originally meant for ultralight aircraft, not futuristic airpods hovering over cities. According to FAA regulatory guidance, summarized in Aviation Consumers Analysis of Richter's X4 approach, Part 103 allows single-seat ultralight vehicles to operate without a pilot certificate or formal airworthiness certification as long as they stay within strict limits on weight, speed, and use. Now here's where it gets interesting, because Richter isn't ignoring those limits. It's building directly into them. The X4 is engineered like it was shaped around the rulebook itself. One seat only, no complex cabin systems, and a design philosophy that leans heavily into simplicity so it can qualify as an ultralight recreational craft. According to PR Newswire's CES 2026 release coverage, the X4 Air Mobility Pod is explicitly positioned to comply with Part 103, so it can be operated without a pilot's license, as long as it stays within those regulatory boundaries. And that's not a small detail, that's the entire gateway. But wait, it gets weirder when you picture what that actually means in practice. A system like this doesn't feel like aviation anymore. It feels like something closer to a personal mobility device that just happens to fly. Lightweight structure, minimal cockpit complexity, and control systems that lean heavily on automation so the human doesn't have to manage every aerodynamic decision in real time. Electrify News describes the X4 as using automatic stabilization and dynamic balance algorithms that constantly adjust for wind and turbulence, which basically means the machine is doing a large portion of the flying for you while the operator focuses on direction and intent rather than raw piloting skill. And here's the shift that most people miss at first glance. Traditional aviation is built on barriers. Years of training, licensing exams, medical checks, flight hours tracked down to the decimal. The FAA system is designed to make sure only so highly trained individuals touch the sky in any meaningful way. But Part 103, as interpreted through devices like the X4, compresses that entire structure into something almost unrecognizable. According to Aviation Consumers' breakdown of no-certificate aircraft trends, manufacturers are now actively targeting a new demographic of buyers who aren't pilots at all. Younger tech-oriented users who see flight less as a profession and more as personal mobility, something closer to owning a drone or an electric scooter than a plane. And that's where the tension starts building quietly, because the moment regulation shifts from prove you can safely operate this to make sure your machine fits inside these constraints, responsibility starts sliding away from formal training and into design assumptions. The law isn't saying you're qualified, it's saying the machine is simple enough that qualification isn't required. Think about that for a second. A system like this doesn't just lower the barrier to entry, it basically redraws the idea of who gets to enter the sky at all. And suddenly, access isn't gated by expertise anymore. It's gated by affordability and physical space, whether you can afford the deposit and whether your environment can even tolerate a vertical takeoff from your driveway or rooftop. But here's the uncomfortable part that sits underneath all of it. Critics of ultralight classification, referenced across aviation safety discussions in Aviation Consumer, point out that regulatory simplicity does not equal operational safety, especially when these vehicles begin entering low-altitude urban environments where reaction time is measured in seconds, not minutes. The X4's ability to operate as low as 3 meters above ground turns it into something that isn't quite air travel and isn't quite ground transport either. It exists in that thin, messy layer where cities are least prepared to enforce rules. And you start to realize the system isn't really asking whether people are trained enough. It's asking whether the machine is predictable enough to survive human unpredictability. Every legend has a blind spot in its foundation, and here the blind spot is responsibility itself. Because once something this accessible enters the sky, accountability stops being centralized. It spreads quietly into designers, regulators, owners, and whoever happens to be standing underneath it when things go wrong. And that's where everything starts to tilt. Because if the law allows anyone to fly, who exactly is going to benefit from it first? The battery, noise, and airspace trap. The X4 feels like freedom the moment you first hear about it, but the second you strip away the excitement, you hit a wall that no marketing can hide. According to CES 2026 coverage summarized by Yahoo Finance, the machine is built around a 20-minute flight window per charge and a top speed of roughly 80 kilometers per hour, about 50 miles per hour, which sounds fast until you realize it barely stretches beyond short city hops or emergency detours across traffic. And that's where the illusion starts to crack a little, because 20 minutes in the air isn't travel in the way we normally understand it. It's more like a burst, a controlled leap from one point to another, and then you're back on the ground waiting again. Electrify News and Surfside Reporting both point out that extended battery packs are being explored, but right now, the physics are still stubbornly in charge. Now here's where it gets interesting. Noise sits under 65 decibels, according to PR Newswire's technical release, which sounds quiet on paper, roughly like a busy conversation, but in a dense neighborhood, that sound doesn't disappear. It stacks. Multiply that by dozens of pods, and suddenly, you don't have silence in the sky anymore. You have a constant presence, a low mechanical hum that cities would have to learn to live with. And get this, even at its best performance window, the X4 isn't replacing cars or trains. It's not meant for distance. It's built for shortcuts, for bypassing congestion, for shaving minutes off a bad commute rather than redefining geography. That's the part many promotional takes skip over, because according to EVTOL Insights, reporting on industry trials across 26 US states, the entire sector is still in experimental integration, meaning regulators are literally watching how these machines behave before deciding where they actually belong in airspace systems. Picture that for a second. 26 states are running test environments just to understand how low-altitude flight should even function in real cities. And then you compare it to other machines in the same space. The Aleph Model A, covered by Design Boom and Forbes, reporting on early production vehicles, pushes a very different direction, closer to a $300,000 hybrid car that can drive 220 miles and fly about 110 miles, but it lives in an entirely different price universe. Meanwhile, Xpeng's modular flying systems and Joby Aviation's air taxi programs sit in between, all trying to solve the same problem from different angles, but none of them escaping the same bottleneck: batteries, airspace, and infrastructure that simply isn't ready. Here's the uncomfortable part. The X4 doesn't break those limits. It sits inside them perfectly. And that means what we're watching isn't a revolution yet. It's a controlled experiment happening inside very tight physical constraints. Because when you really zoom out, you start to realize something simple but heavy. The machine might fly, but the system around it still decides how far it can actually go. And that changes everything about what comes next. Who owns the sky? Power, cities, and inequality. The moment flying becomes personal. The sky stops being space and starts becoming property, even if nobody officially calls it that yet. According to Forbes' analysis of urban air mobility published in 2026, cities and private investors are already treating low-altitude flight as a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure opportunity, not just a transportation upgrade. And here's the thing. Once money enters that layer, control follows it almost instantly. Cities are already preparing for this shift. Reports from Flying Magazine and FAA-backed multi-state trials show that 26 U.S. states are actively testing integration zones for eVTOL aircraft, which include defining corridors, safety rules, and experimental landing systems. That might sound technical, but in practice, it means cities are starting to carve invisible highways in the sky, deciding where machines like the X4 can and cannot go. Now think about what happens when that logic scales. Landing pads become valuable real estate. Rooftops stop being just architectural features and start becoming transport infrastructure. Wealthier districts get faster access routes, while dense or underfunded areas get restricted corridors or no-fly zones altogether, not necessarily by intention, but by design constraints and regulation layering. And this is where inequality quietly shifts shape. According to commentary in Forbes and aviation policy discussions surrounding eVTOL rollout, early adoption of flying vehicles is heavily concentrated in high-income regions with strong regulatory systems and infrastructure budgets. That means cities like New York, Dubai, and parts of California are effectively becoming testing grounds for sky-based mobility economies, while many other regions remain entirely dependent on ground systems. Now pause on that idea for a second. If access to the sky depends on infrastructure, regulation, and capital, then flying isn't universal freedom anymore. It becomes a tiered system. Some people move through air corridors like highways. Others stay locked to the ground grid. And the companies building these systems, whether it's Richter with the X4, Aleph with its Model A, or Xpeng with modular air carriers, as reported by Talk News, are not just building machines. They are shaping early definitions of who gets priority in a new layer of travel. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Once this system matures, cities won't just regulate traffic, they'll regulate altitude access. And that means the sky becomes structured the same way roads are, except far more exclusive and far harder to expand once it's set. But if this is the foundation of a new sky layer above cities, what might actual travel look like in 10 years? And how much of it will be owned by private companies instead of public transit systems? The future of travel. The X4 looks like a finished idea when you first see it, but in reality, it's closer to a draft, a rough sketch of a system that hasn't fully formed yet. According to Forbes' 2026 coverage on flying cars and urban air mobility, what we're really seeing isn't one invention, but the early scaffolding of an entire transport layer being built above existing cities. And that layer is starting to split. On one side, you have ground systems, buses, trains, and roads, still doing most of the heavy lifting for daily life. Then you have low-altitude pods, like the X4, designed for short, fast jumps across congestion. Above that, mid-altitude air taxis from companies like Joby Aviation and others in FAA-backed trials are being tested as regional connectors, linking cities rather than neighborhoods. This emerging three-dimensional grid introduces immense technical challenges that urban planners have never faced before. Managing physical corridors is easy when dealing with concrete and steel on the ground, but coordinating abstract lines of flight across thousands of cubic meters of metropolitan air requires a flawless computational framework. The architecture of our future cities will inevitably adapt, giving rise to high-rise structures designed with built-in aerial staging platforms and localized charging arrays. Now here's where it gets interesting. None of these layers replaces the others. They stack. According to eVTOL Insights, reporting on April 2026 industry updates, and Flying Magazine's coverage of multi-state trials, the aviation ecosystem is already being shaped around this layered model because no single vehicle solves everything. Batteries still limit range, airspace still requires coordination, and infrastructure still doesn't exist at scale. So instead of one flying car future, what's emerging is something more fragmented, almost like a vertical version of today's transport system. This fragmentation forces an entirely new approach to regulatory oversight. Governments cannot rely on traditional air traffic control paradigms to monitor hundreds of small craft operating simultaneously at low altitudes. Instead, autonomous deconfliction protocols must be hard-coded into the machines themselves, creating an invisible machine-to-machine communications layer that handles proximity tracking and collision avoidance automatically. And get this, the economics are already pulling it in a specific direction. High-end systems like Alepht's Model A, documented by Design Boom and Forbes, sit in the luxury category. Xpeng's modular land-air systems push into experimental logistics. Meanwhile, something like the X4 sits at the entry point, technically more accessible, but still niche enough that it won't become mass transport anytime soon. So the real question isn't whether the technology works, it's who it actually works for first. Venture capital is aggressively flooding this market, demanding quick returns that inevitably favor high-margin services over affordable public utilities. Consequently, the initial iterations of these networks are being built specifically to serve corporate commuters and wealthy individuals looking to bypass urban bottlenecks entirely, bypassing the very concept of democratic public transport. Because if early adoption follows capital, then the first version of this Skyroad system won't feel like public infrastructure. It will feel like a premium network layered above everything else. And that creates a split that looks a lot like what we've already seen with internet access, banking, and even mobility itself in earlier eras. A few regions move fast, others lag, and the gap becomes structural before it becomes visible. This geographical disparity will create stark boundaries within major metropolitan areas, altering how property values are calculated and how municipal resources are allocated. Neighborhoods located beneath high-traffic flight corridors may suffer from persistent acoustic pollution, while exclusive enclaves with dedicated vertiport access will experience unprecedented levels of regional connectivity, effectively widening the socio-economic divide. Now think about regions without strong grid systems or aviation infrastructure. Reports across aviation futures discussions note that many developing regions will likely adopt these technologies later, not because they're excluded outright, but because the supporting systems, power, maintenance, regulation, and vertiport networks take time to build. Establishing a functional, low-altitude transport ecosystem demands a highly resilient electrical grid capable of handling massive spikes in power demand from rapid charging systems. Without substantial upfront investment in localized energy generation and grid stabilization, the physical machines remain grounded, regardless of how advanced their internal technology might be. So the X4 isn't the endpoint of travel evolution. It's a signal flare, a preview of how mobility might stratify vertically, not just geographically. And once you see it that way, the future stops feeling like a single road forward. It starts looking like layers of movement, stacked above each other, each with its own price of entry. The X4 is real, shipping in 2026, priced at $39,900 and designed to fly without a pilot's license under ultralight rules, as confirmed in PR Newswire and Yahoo Finance coverage. It lowers the barrier to personal flight in a way traditional aviation never did, but it also exposes how unprepared our systems are for mass access to the sky. If you could buy one, would you use it daily, worry about safety, or avoid it completely? And do you think third world cities will ever see this?